Telling the truth in today's cancel culture is not necessarily easy. You can pay a pretty heavy price for it. Had they been doing their job, had they been honest and transparent with the American public, we wouldn't be here today. Since the beginning of this pandemic, have the policies, have they worked? Have the shutdowns worked? Have the mask mandates worked? Have the vaccines and are the vaccine mandates going to work? Higher-ups in the agencies sabotaged early treatment. I don't think there's a person here that is anti-vaccine. Obviously, those that have been injured by vaccines were very pro-vaccine. Our government officials, I talked about them not being particularly honest. We invited them all here. Representatives from the heads of the CDC, Secretary of Defense Austin, Secretary of Labor Walsh, Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, FDA Acting Commissioner Woodcock, HHS Secretary Becerra, NIAID Director Fauci, NIH Director Collins, together with the CEOs of Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, and BioNTech. None of them showed up. President Biden said, if you're vaccinated, you're not going to be hospitalized. You're not going to be in an ICU unit. You're not going to die. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. He said, this is a pandemic on the unvaccinated. How I wish he was right when he said these vaccines were going to be that effective. I wish we had data in the U.S. If they're collecting it, they're not sharing with the American public. Of the people who have died from COVID in the UK with the Delta variant over the last 7.5 months, 63% have been fully vaccinated. Over the last 4 weeks in the UK, 78% of those that have died with the Delta variant from COVID, 78% have been fully vaccinated. If the vaccines are effective, then mandates are pointless. Right? I mean, if the vaccines are effective, there's no need for mandates. If you want to get the vaccine, you've got it, you're protected, and you don't care whether somebody else gets vaccinated. You have to understand the destructiveness of these mandates. People that had the courage and compassion to treat COVID patients, so many of them caught COVID. Some died, most survived. Now they're treating the vaccine injured. They will not get vaccinated. We will lose decades worth of experience in our healthcare system. How insane is this? The science tells us those with natural immunity probably have better and more long-lasting immunity than those fully vaxxed. If you're vaccinated and you can still get infected and still transmit, what is the rationale? There is no rationale in injured individuals just to tell their story. That's it, just to tell the story. But unless the medical establishment, their doctors, our health agencies are willing to acknowledge just the possibility of vaccine injuries, not willing to acknowledge the root cause of a condition, of an injury, of a malady, of an illness, how can you hope to cure that illness? How can you help these individuals who participate in some of the trials to benefit humanity? How can you help them fully recover if you're not willing to admit that vaccine injuries are real? But if you just compare the adverse events for the standard flu vaccine versus COVID, you can see that there's something happening here, something that needs to be acknowledged. President Biden ought to be concerned about. On average, the number of deaths reported on VAERS for the flu vaccine is 78 per year, 78. The updated figures today are 17,619. That is 225 times the number of deaths in just a 10-month period versus an annual figure for the flu vaccine. Vaccine injuries are real. Vaccine injuries are rare and mild until one happens to you or your loved one.
Excuse me. I was a father of a 16-year-old son. A single parent. I raised my boy since he was a baby. He meant the world to me. I got the vaccine to protect my son. They're announcing how it was safe for teenagers. Me and my son have never been apart. We're always together. He was my best friend. I always told him it was me and you against the world. He wanted to join the Air Force. So I said, good, that's good. I'll back you up on anything you want to do. But I gave him everything he wanted. We got the Pfizer vaccine because I thought it was to protect him. I thought it was the right thing to do. It was like playing Russian roulette. My government lied to me. They said it was safe. Now I go home to an empty house. I'd get home from work. He'd come running out. He knew when I'd get home. He'd come running out, give me a hug. He was my baby boy. Next week is his birthday. You know where I'm going to celebrate his birthday at? Thanksgiving I'm going to spend at the cemetery. Christmas at that cemetery. They need to quit pushing this on their children. I lost mine. Y'all need to protect yours. It's worth the risk. It wasn't worth the risk to me. So don't make the mistake I did. But I don't trust my government anymore. I'm here because I'm Junior's voice. I'm doing this in my son's honor. If I can protect 1 or 2 children, that means the world to me. What they did to my son, they knew what was happening. I consider that murder. They knew they caused heart conditions in teenagers. Why wasn't this information released until October 1st this year? My son would be here with me. They murdered my son. These kids, with all these side effects, that's child abuse right there. We don't let anybody hurt our children. Why isn't something being done? Why are they doing this to our kids? We all need to fight together to make sure we're not going to hurt any more children.
This is real. Wish more of the mainstream media was here to listen to these stories. I would just suggest we hear the stories from the vaccine injured.
What he went through is something that no parent ever wants to experience and no one should ever experience. I just want to say thank you to Dr. Fauci, to the FDA heads, CDC, NIH, everyone for not showing up to this meeting and not listening to us. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you have our interests at heart. My name is Kyle Warner. I'm a 29-year-old professional mountain bike racer and 3-time national champion. You told me this vaccine is safe and effective, period. And I believed you. I joined the rapidly growing number of young men who develop pericarditis post-mRNA vaccine. That is the inflammation of the liner surrounding the heart. That condition, along with POTS and reactive arthritis, have completely brought an end to life as I knew it. I have been bedridden, unable to work, and unable to exercise for months. I fear that my career has officially been ended. The real question is whether or not you will stand up to your favorite pharmaceutical lobbyist in defense of the American people you are supposed to serve. It is estimated that Moderna and Pfizer will make around $60 billion in revenue this year from COVID-19 vaccines. And with the rollout of boosters and mandates, it seems like much of that is destined to be recurring revenue. This is the first ever mass administration of mRNA vaccines, and the drug companies need to compensate us if they are going to be testing on us. One nation, under siege, completely divisible, with liberty and justice for all corporations doesn't sound quite as good. I'm asking you human to human, please do the right thing and help us.
Maddie participated in the Pfizer trial for children. When she was 12, she's now 13 years old, vaccine injured.
We are pro-vaccine and pro-science, which is why we agreed to let Maddie and her 2 older brothers volunteer for the trial.
And both Bree and Maddie have tragically and unfortunately been cast aside, ignored, forgotten by the vaccine manufacturers and by our healthcare agencies.
This is my daughter, Maddie, and she was 12 years old. She participated in the Pfizer COVID vaccine trial for 12 to 15-year-olds at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. When they asked if they could be in it, it seemed like a win-win. She can't walk. She's in a wheelchair. She has an NG tube for all of her nutrition. She has constant pain in her stomach, back, and neck. She was over there laying on chairs because she can't make it through this. She can't feel her legs, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When she got her first dose, her reaction was typical. She had fever, body aches, and fatigue, and it went away in a couple days. When she got her second dose, she had immediate pain where she had gotten the injection. In less than 12 hours, she developed severe abdominal pain, horrible nausea, painful electric shocks on her spine and neck. Her hands were ice cold when you touched them. She had, and on her feet, pain all over her body. Her vaccine arm went numb. And I'm finding more and more stuff. You forget stuff because so much has happened to her. She had chest pain, severe chest pain. The way she described it, it felt like her heart was being pulled out of her neck. Tachycardia that was actually seen on an EKG, and she was extremely dizzy, so she felt like she couldn't stand up. So those were her reactions, better idea of what happens in a trial, because I did not know. My kids have never been in a trial before, so I went in trusting the drug companies, the FDA, CDC, the hospital where the trial was held, Cincinnati Children's, a very reputable hospital. We did what we were told. This leaves a lot of room for human error. In the EUA amendment, Maddie's adverse reaction was reduced to 5 lines. that they claim was eventually diagnosed as functional abdominal pain. Maddie experienced over 35 adverse events, different things happening to her, very similar to all the stories that you're hearing here. Some examples are blood in her urine, decreased vision, loss of feeling from her waist down, dizziness, fainting, tremors, muscle weakness, and more. None of these were mentioned in either document. So let me ask you this, functional abdominal pain, stomach ache. Does your child, when they have a stomach ache, does that put your child in a wheelchair? Does your child's stomach ache require a feeding tube? They did everything in their power to hide everything that happened to her. If they minimalize Maddie's reaction to the vaccine like this, I wonder what else was hidden.
Now, obviously, we invited the CEO from Pfizer or some representative from Pfizer. Nobody showed up. Pfizer has to be aware of you. Have they reached out to you?
Neither Pfizer, the FDA, or the CDC has ever talked to us or attempted to.
So that is outrageous. I mean, not only totally cast aside, but I think what you described in your testimony I would term it as a cover-up. But thank you, Maddie. God bless you.
My name is Brianne Dressen, and most of you have never heard of me. We're just everyday Americans. For us, this is not political, largely ignored and silenced, and we hope that you listen, and we hope that you ask questions. I suffered a life-altering reaction to my COVID vaccine. I suffered a cascade of neurological symptoms that persisted for months. I still feel like I'm being electrocuted 24/7. I kept my symptoms and my story completely to myself, but in the spring, I started finding more and more like me. And before we knew it, there were thousands of us, all of us unable to receive medical care, recognition, either from the drug companies, the CDC, the FDA. Had it happen with all of the brands, over 70% of us had had no previous existing health condition. 98% of us have had all of our previous vaccines, the vast majority of us even having our flu vaccines. We are not anti-vax. Because the CDC and FDA continued to ignore our pleas, we decided we needed to act because we started to see this happen to kids like Maddie. So from our sick beds, we sprang into action. We reached out to our elected representatives. We participated in studies across the country. None of them can get their research published. We then reached out to the media, being repeatedly told that we can't make the vaccines look bad. All of them persisting in the narrative that if this was really happening, the CDC and the FDA would have said so. We are completely on our own. We've been branded as anti-vax. Misinformation. 24 hours after Senator Johnson hosted our last conference, we had our Facebook support groups pulled apart. I lost contact with 8 actively suicidal people. After months of isolation, aggressive suppression, we began to connect with others. Physicians, they see the harms and they see what is happening to the injured and the lack of transparency. My body will not stop attacking itself. And this is beyond the worst amount of torture. They have further erased my very existence. Please tell our stories.
You are showing us your vulnerability and your courage, and you inspire me at least. We still know nothing, absolutely nothing about long-term vaccine harms because the vaccines haven't been out that long. How can we possibly provide informed consent without this information? We are not opposed to vaccines. Rather, we oppose their mandated use. We are clinicians who want to treat patients harmed by vaccines, but whose practices are limited by their employers and professional boards. And we have nothing, absolutely nothing, to personally gain from being here. Indeed, we have everything to lose, including our jobs, our titles, our livelihoods. We can all agree adverse events that disable and kill are not acceptable outcomes. We just ask that you listen. We aim to challenge the perspectives and things you believe to be true. In turn, we ask for you to challenge us. As an aviation pilot, Cody Flint.
I'm an agricultural pilot by profession with over 10,000 total flight hours. I received my first dose of the Pfizer COVID vaccine. Within 30 minutes, I developed a severe stabbing headache that later became a burning sensation in the back of my neck. 2 days after vaccination, got in my airplane to do a job that would take only a few hours. Immediately after taking off, I knew something was not right with me. I was starting to develop tunnel vision, and my headache was getting worse. I pulled my airplane up to turn around and felt an extreme burst of pressure in my ear. Nearly blacked out, dizzy, disoriented, nauseous, and shaking uncontrollably. I was able to land my plane without incident, although I do not remember doing this. Left and right perilymphatic fistulas, eustachian tube dysfunction, and elevated intracranial pressure due to brain swelling. And my doctors told me only an adverse reaction to the vaccine could have caused this much spontaneous damage. I've had 6 spinal taps over 8 months to monitor my intracranial pressure, and 2 surgeries 8 weeks apart to repair the fistulas. I have missed nearly an entire year of my life. Days of baseball games, playing in the backyard, and just picking up my kids to hug them have been replaced with being trapped in a sick body, doctor visits, invasive procedures, and more questions than answers. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fly an airplane again. I have used all of my savings to pay medical bills. My family and I are on the verge of losing everything we have. The federal government has yet to help a single one of the vaccine injured. We did what was asked of us by being part of the solution. That solution has taken everything from me and my family. We have been ignored and silenced. Does anyone really think it's fair to make the vaccine injured wait years for help? We urgently need this help.
Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, who is the brigade surgeon for the 1st Aviation Brigade.
I'm an Army Aerospace Medicine Specialist. I am now a board-certified aerospace medicine specialist with a master's in public health. My opinion is formed from my medical education, training, and my firsthand experience treating soldiers injured by the vaccine. This statement is made as a protected communication under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act, Title 10 U.S.C. 1034. I believe the COVID vaccine is a greater threat to soldiers' health and military readiness than the virus itself. Over 200,000 service members have rejected the vaccine. We have never lost 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield in a few months. Taking soldiers out of uniform has the same impact on readiness as losing them on the battlefield. I enlisted in the Army and completed basic training by the age of 17. I have spent the last 30 years serving this great country. You will not change something if you will not acknowledge it's broken. Across this country, 444,000 patients die every year from medical errors. So we skipped 2 years of phase 2 trials and 3 years of phase 3 trials. We only lost 12 active duty soldiers to COVID. Yet we're going to risk the health of the entire fighting force on a vaccine we only had 2 months of safety data on? The response was, "You're damn right, Colonel, and you're going to get every soldier you can to take the vaccine so I can get enough data points to determine if the vaccine is safe." Our service members are national treasures. They have stared down bullets, been blown up by IEDs and bombs. They have endured thankless and protracted wars, missing the birth of their children. These are warriors, not lab rats. In only a few months into the vaccination campaign, already had more deaths than in any year for all vaccines combined in each of the 10 years previously. I encountered numerous soldiers who told me of threats, coercion, and intimidation to get the vaccine. This violated medical ethics, specifically the Nuremberg Code. The epidemiologist emailed me back and told me that they were not tracking, tracing, or monitoring adverse events. Healthcare professionals were being used as the marketing arm of pharmaceutical companies. This is a violation of DODI that prohibits endorsement of a civilian product. You have everything to lose and nothing to gain. I found 8 out of 10 drugs pulled off the market disproportionately harmed females. It took 40 years for the medical establishment to figure out that DES caused transgenerational infertility and cancers. And this was a drug that went through standard clinical trials. There is no substitute for time. You can throw money at things, you can cut regulations, but there is no substitute for time. The CDC announced that they were holding an emergency meeting to discuss higher than expected myocarditis in 16 to 24-year-olds. Despite this announcement, the military did not even pause their vaccination efforts. Why? Leadership ignored my concerns. Can't have informed consent if you don't tell your patients of the risks and benefits of a treatment or procedure. Third pilot had been vaccinated and felt like he was drunk, chronically fatigued within 24 hours after vaccination. He realized it wasn't going away. One morning, I had to ground 3 out of 3 pilots due to vaccine injuries. The next day, my patients were canceled, my charts were pulled for review, and I was told that I would not be seeing acute patients anymore, just healthy pilots there for their flight physical. Dr. Fauci and the members of the FDA and NIH are unfit to fly this plane. They need to be grounded. Do not let fear, division, and threats guide your actions. Seek wisdom, pursue truth, and put your trust in the Lord. Hold the line.
I received the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine at my workplace. I was encouraged by my employer to get the vaccine. The day after the vaccine, on April 6th, I started experiencing side effects I believe were related to the shot. I lost bladder control, suffered ED, my legs felt odd, I had a cinching sensation in my hips. Over the next few days, my symptoms worsened, so I went to the ER. I was tested for COVID and tested positive. 3 days after that, I felt like I drank poison. My whole body felt different. I went to bed at 10 o'clock, woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, paralyzed. I was transported to the hospital and admitted to the COVID-19 unit. The doctors were uncertain how to treat me, and they could not decide on a diagnosis. Eventually, they found out I had a blood clot in my leg. My entire spinal cord had swollen and hemorrhaged. I aspirated on water, placed on a ventilator. I was in ICU for 2 weeks. I was worried, panicked about my condition. My life as I knew it was gone. I spent 105 days in St. Luke's Hospital. Everything has come back negative in an attempt trying to pin my paralysis on my body and not the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I am an unemployed paraplegic who's learning an entire new lifestyle. I am real, my symptoms are real, and my life has changed. And that is real. Please pay attention. Thank you.
Suzanne Newell is a triathlete from St. Paul, Minnesota, diagnosed with an autoimmune disease and reliant on a walker or a cane to walk following vaccinations.
I very willingly followed the recommendation of the CDC and received my second Pfizer shot. I was previously an active long-distance biker and triathlete. I was used to high-energy, highly motivated lifestyle. I love keeping my body and my mind strong and disciplined. I have very little motivation or energy, and I'm in a constant state of extreme fatigue. I struggled to retrieve words. I was valedictorian in my high school. And to remember things, I can't concentrate or focus, and my brain is in constant fog. And I'm aimlessly wandering through my brain, and it's torture. I developed a rash on my forehead. I constantly have loud ringing in my ears. My once strong body aches. It's like I aged 40 years overnight. I'm intermittently dizzy, my vision is blurry, my right pupil is not dilating properly, my right leg has extreme burning pain, and I also get muscle spasms and twitches, and I have internal vibrations. I am now a frequent flyer at the doctor with very few answers and many, many painful tests. I see a neurologist, rheumatologist, cardiologist, gynecologist, neuro-ophthalmologist, and physical therapists, among others. Most doctors are overworked, and they're unaware that this condition is even possible. So each visit, I have to fight to be believed and not written off as anxious. It's been more than 6 months, and most symptoms are worse, not better. I've been diagnosed with small fiber neuropathy and an autoimmune disease. But getting to these diagnoses was a struggle. I just hope the rest of the world opens their ears soon.
After retiring twice, I'm back at work as a faculty member at Stanford University. I'm a former NIH Associate Director and a former Chief Science Officer at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. We are often told, trust the science, because after all, scientists all agree, right? Well, do they? In practice, scientists rarely agree. In fact, advancement in science depends on colleagues challenging the prevailing wisdom. Serious scholars have not been able to examine the raw data that justify the FDA and the CDC decisions, is that the vaccine manufacturers are not honoring requests to provide raw data. Pfizer, for example, will not make data publicly available till 2025. This is really an unacceptable delay for a product that would be used by billions of people worldwide. The vaccine studies have not made much of the information public. Only one is shown to have been completed, and zero, that's right, 0 studies have reported their results publicly. Legitimate scientific challenges have been set aside or dismissed as, quote, misinformation, unquote. Being labeled as an anti-vaxxer could be a career ender. We should insist on independent data analysis by investigators who are not employed by the vaccine manufacturers. We are making big decisions on the basis of limited, highly selected evidence. A compromised scientific process may lead to poor decisions, and it may set a bad precedent.
Young mother from Tacoma, Washington, reliant on a walker following her vaccination.
I received my first Pfizer vaccine on April 13th and my second dose on May 5th. I lost my ability to speak naturally. I have become unable to walk without a walker and never know if or when the tremors will come or go. I can no longer cook, clean, or even pick up and hold my baby for too long before my body begins to shake uncontrollably or is thrown into excruciating amounts of pain. I've been to the ER more times than I can count, and as a result have seen countless ER doctors, as well as 2 neurologists who have given me no diagnoses, CT scans, EEGs, EKGs, and an MRI, all of which the doctors told me came back normal. I deserve to be heard and treated with compassion, but instead I have been called a liar and a fake, and I have even been told by the ER doctors that this is all in my head and that there is nothing medically wrong with me. To the point where they called a social worker to have me evaluated and tried to have me committed to Western State Mental Health Hospital. It's time to stop allowing doctors and nurses to treat us with such disgust and demand they be held accountable for their incompassionate treatment of COVID vaccine-injured people, and demand they stop ignoring and dismissing what's happening to thousands of us around the world. Come together as a nation of people with kindness and compassion instead of hate and anger. A nation of people who stand for change and freedom and won't be silenced any longer.
Dr. Peter Doshi is the Associate Professor of Pharmaceutical Health Services Research at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy and the editor at BMJ.
We train students on how to go beyond a study abstract and start to pick apart and critically assess biomedical studies, not just take them at face value. Everybody knows that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. But if hospitalizations and deaths were almost exclusively occurring in the unvaccinated, why would booster shots be necessary? There's a disconnect there. There's something to be curious about. There's something not adding up, and we should all be asking, is it true that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated? What does that even mean? Those who claimed the trials showed the vaccines were highly effective in saving lives were wrong. I am one of the academics that argues that these mRNA products, which everybody calls vaccines, are qualitatively different than standard vaccines. And so I found it fascinating to learn that Merriam-Webster changed its definition of vaccine early this year. mRNA products did not meet the definition of vaccine that has been in place for 15 years at Merriam-Webster. But the definition was expanded such that mRNA products are now vaccines. How would you feel about mandating COVID vaccines if we didn't call them vaccines? What if these injections were called drugs instead? So here's the scenario. We have this drug, and we have evidence that it doesn't prevent infection, nor does it stop viral transmission. But the drug is understood to reduce your risk of becoming very sick and dying of COVID. Would you take a dose of this drug every 6 months or so for possibly the rest of your life? Just because we call it a vaccine doesn't mean we should assume these new products are just like all other childhood vaccines which get mandated. I think it's time to inject some critical thinking into that conversation, and that is what I hope we're doing today.
63% of those deaths were with the fully vaxxed population. So again, what is the point to these divisive mandates that are going to be devastating for healthcare? It's going to affect military readiness, as your previous guest talked about. I am talking to whistleblowers that have gag orders on them. Brian, something else I have to tell America. We do not have an FDA-approved vaccine being administered in the U.S. The FDA played a bait and switch. They approved the Comirnaty version of Pfizer drug. It's not available in the U.S. They even admit it. I sent them a letter 3 days later going, what are you doing? What they did is they extended the emergency use authorization for the Pfizer drug vaccine that's available in the U.S. Here it is more than 30 days later. They haven't asked that very simple question. If you're saying that the Pfizer drug is the same as the Comirnaty, why didn't you provide FDA approval on that? So there's not an FDA-approved drug, and of course they announced it so they could push through these mandates so that people actually think, oh, okay, now these things are FDA approved. They are not. And again, maybe they should be, but the FDA isn't telling me why. Basic humanity of acknowledging reality and doing everything we can as a society. We have to admit there's a side effect here, and it's changed people's lives forever. So again, I'm begging anybody watching this today or via video, first of all, share the video. Share with every contact you have. Let these stories be seen. Let these stories be heard. Let them be believed so that as society, we can do the right thing. Research and treatment. And by the way, a vaccine injury fund that actually compensates those who did what everybody asked them to do for the good of their neighbors, for the good of society. The least we can do is acknowledge their pain, help them recover, and compensate them for their injuries.
CBD is now a buzzword. You can hear it everywhere, and you're going to hear even more about it.
What's special about our CBD oil? Our CBD oil contains additional compounds from the hemp plant located in the root. These compounds are very medicinal, and no one else offers this in their CBD product. Now, what is it made with? What's the main ingredient? What else besides CBD is in there? We use MCT oil, feeding and fueling your mitochondria, which are literally the engines of your cells. It'll give you energy, it'll increase your immune system. I'm telling you, this is almost too good to be true. It's a cure-all, helps with headaches, anxiety, mood, arthritis, tumors, joint ache, joint pain, inflammation, and the list goes on.
At the end of the trial period, the rats that had been given the CBD had much less bone destruction, they healed much faster, and their gums were much healthier. There are now toothpastes that have CBD incorporated in the toothpaste, and these do not destroy the good bacteria, but they enable the good bacteria to proliferate and continue to grow and minimize the harm of the bad bacteria.
This is like a shield for your heart and for your body against these spikes. So if you took it, you should be taking CBD. Buy it locally or source it somehow. Check out these studies. These are peer-reviewed studies.
Cannabidiol inhibits SARS-CoV-2 spike, S, protein-induced cytotoxicity and inflammation through a progamma-dependent TLR4/NLRP3/caspase-1 signaling suppression in COCO2 cell line. Our data indicate, in conclusion, that CBD is a powerful inhibitor of SB protein interotoxicity in vitro.
We also realize that CBD helps with myocarditis, specifically autoimmune myocarditis.
Cannabidiol limits T-cell-mediated chronic autoimmune myocarditis, implications to autoimmune disorders and organ transplantation. Chronic treatment with CBD largely attenuated the CD3+ and CD4+ T-cell-mediated inflammatory response and injury, myocardial fibrosis and cardiac dysfunction in mice. In conclusion, CBD may represent a promising novel treatment for managing autoimmune myocarditis and possibly other autoimmune disorders and organ transplantation.
I also treated my mother's rheumatoid arthritis, gout, and acid reflux with CBD. All organic, all natural, 100% homeopathic, with zero side effects and zero drug interactions. There are plenty of peer-reviewed studies below on this site for you to see for yourself how CBD works. When he says CBD, he's saying ultra-cannabidiol.
Did it surprise you how well it worked for you?
I was surprised. I thought it was a gimmick at first. Yeah, and then I tried it and I was like, you know what, this is actually better for me. Starting to fit where they need to fit, and I can sit comfortably in a chair and not sit in pain. Before, I could not sit in a car for more than 30 minutes without pain. Now I can sit in a car for over hours and I do not have pain.
So how do you take ultra cannabidiol? How do you take it personally?
I take it and I sit it under my tongue and I just let it sit there, and I do it 3 times a day. And I just let it sit there for as long as possible. Have a dropper and I just leave it under my tongue and I just let it sit there for a little while. And then later on in the day, if I feel like any aches or anything, any discomfort, I just leave another half a dropper under my tongue. And I go to bed and my back doesn't hurt when I go to sleep. And I get to actually get good night's sleep, and that's very key for me. And I would continue to buy this for sure.
What would you say to somebody who says CBD is just a gimmick, it doesn't really work?
I would say try CBD for 1 day and see if it doesn't help you. Just try it, just once.
I want to provide it to everybody for a cheaper cost than in stores. All organic, It won't get you high. This is a medicinal compound that does work and does heal people. I've seen it myself, and I personally take it every single day. So if you want to cut the stores out and you want it cheaper, you want to give it a try, you want a bulk discount, because if it works for you, you're going to want to keep buying it, and you don't want to keep paying the $50 to $75 in the store each time because it's not feasibly plausible. So if you would like to try it and you'd like it for cheap and you'd like a better product than they provide in stores, this is the perfect time for you to give me a call. Let me give you the medicine that you need and deserve for your life. This is a no-brainer, win-win. At least try it. I'm glad I did.